If you're currently studying for your CompTIA Security Plus exam, then this is the right video for you because I passed my exam on my first attempt, and in this video, we're going to go over 10 practice questions from Domain 2 of the exam objectives, threats, vulnerabilities, and mitigations. So let's get started. Question 1. Which of the following actors is most associated with performing cyber attacks against software of other countries? Insider threat, nation state, organized crime, or unskilled attacker? And the correct answer is a nation state threat actor. These are also known as state sponsored government actors, and they are by far the most sophisticated threat group in the exam objectives. So while they're performing attacks in other countries, this describes a nation state threat actor who attack critical infrastructure in other countries or other cities. Organized crime is also a sophisticated threat group, but less sophisticated than nation state. These crime groups are motivated by financial gain, so things like profit, or if they're using ransomware as a service to gather your information and then demand a payment in exchange for that, that is absolutely associated with organized crime. An unskilled attacker is what was previously referred to as a script kiddie. This is someone who doesn't even really know what they're doing. They're just trying and testing random tools like DDoS or distributed denial of service tools against websites in an attempt to crash websites or to deface the websites of celebrities and stuff like that. And these are typically motivated by chaos and disruption, as you'll find in the official exam objectives. Nation state actors are also motivated by things like cyber espionage and war. Insider threat describes a disgruntled employee in an organization. It's a malicious employee who has malicious and nefarious intentions on doing things like exfiltrating data using removable devices like a USB drive or a hard drive. And insider threats are some of the most dangerous ones to have, especially within your organization. And their main motivation is revenge because they want to get revenge, for example, on the company for firing them. Question 2. An employee has received a call from someone claiming to be the company's CEO who demands they buy and send them gift cards. Which of the following best describes this scenario? And choose two. Is it vishing, smishing, impersonation, business email compromise, or watering hole? And the correct answers are impersonation and vishing, because vishing is voice phishing. It's the process of extracting user information over the phone. It's getting them to divulge their personal or sensitive information over the phone. So that's why it's voice phishing. And that's associated with the calling aspect of this question. Impersonation is also correct because they're claiming to be the CEO, because impersonation is the concept of claiming to be someone that you're not, claiming to be a user, claiming to be an employee, claiming to be a CEO. Whoever they're claiming to be that they're not, that's the concept of impersonation. Smishing is SMS phishing. It's the concept of phishing over text messages. So you might receive like a fake or phishing link on your phone that leads you to a fake bank website. Business email compromise is the concept of an employee's email address or anyone's in the organization's email address that gets compromised by an attacker who then does things like sends emails or sends spam to other employees of the organization. And finally, watering hole is an attack method that attackers use where they first identify websites that employees frequently visit, and then they exploit typically a 0-day vulnerability in that website, a vulnerability that has not been discovered up until this very moment. Question 3. An organization has discovered a user account with administrator level access. The user does not need this level of access to perform their job. Which of the following should the organization most likely implement? Least privilege, decommissioning, shadow IT, or pretexting? And the correct answer is least privilege, because this is the concept of ensuring that your users don't have excessive rights beyond what they need to perform their job. Decommissioning is the incorrect answer here because Why would you decommission a user account just because it has higher level privileges? The question didn't state anything about something malicious being performed here or any kind of result after the fact of this happening. So why would you decommission a user account who, for all we know, is active within the organization and who's working there? It's just not the right answer. Shadow IT is the concept of employees in an organization doing something with software or hardware that they didn't have explicit permission or approval from to do from the IT department. So, for example, they'll commonly do this for ease of use. So, they'll disable a firewall, or they might disable the antivirus software, or they might install a wireless access point for better network connectivity. This is different from an insider threat who has malicious intentions because Shadow IT just describes people who don't have any malicious or nefarious intentions. They're just doing this to improve the ease of their daily jobs. Finally, pretexting is a concept of creating a made up or fictional scenario to get users to divulge their personal information. So this is typically combined with things like phishing to create a made up scenario. Question 4. A user wants to bypass existing mobile device security features to allow for the installation of unauthorized third party applications. Which of the following should be implemented? Segmentation, jailbreaking, patching vulnerable devices, or side loading? And the correct answer is jailbreaking because this is the process of modifying your firmware to allow the installation of applications that are not native to the official App Store. So this would allow you to do things like side loading, which is the concept in and of itself of installing third-party applications from random websites. Segmentation is the concept of segmenting your devices using things like VLANs or virtual local area networks into divided security zones in order to improve the security of your organization, because that would make it so that if an attacker were to gain access to one part of the organization, they wouldn't be able to gain access to the other half that contains all the other devices, because they'd have to break their way through the security controls to gain access to that other half. Patching vulnerable devices, of course, this is important. It's the concept of updating your devices so that they are no longer vulnerable to be exploited by attackers. But we're looking specifically for a way to bypass mobile device security features that would prevent you from doing side loading, and that is jailbreaking. Question 5. Upon implementing a BYOD program, which of the following would be classified as the most severe vulnerability? End of life, account lockout, default password changes, or jailbreaking? And the correct answer is jailbreaking once more, because this is the most severe vulnerability that's listed here. Jailbreaking is the concept of modifying your firmware so that you can bypass existing security controls and do things like install additional software or applications that you wouldn't have been able to install if you hadn't jailbroken your device in the first place. And the reason why it's most associated with BYOD is because jailbreaking involves installing third-party applications. A lot of times it's used in this, and if you install these third-party applications and you bypass existing security features, you are very likely to install malware on that device, on that mobile device. You could accidentally install something like a Trojan or a rootkit or a keylogger. And the reason why it's associated with BYOD is because BYOD is bring your own device. It's the implementation that's used in organizations whereby they allow their users to bring in their own personal devices into the workplace. And if you jailbroke your device, you could be bringing in an infected device with malware on it directly into the organization. And the reason why this is more severe than end of life, because end of life describes a hardware that does not receive application updates or patches anymore. And while this is a severe vulnerability, it's very possible that no one exploited that software yet. Whereas if you had jailbroken your device, you were already exploited and you're bringing in the malware directly into the organization, making it more severe than simply not having your updates in place. Account lockout is the concept of being locked out of your account. This is typically associated with things like brute force attacks, where you'll try to use a brute force attack. You'll try endless passwords against a single user account in an attempt to log in. And after some time, Google will just log you out because they can tell what's actually happening. And finally, default password changes. This is not a vulnerability of any kind. This is just a good security measure to implement so that your passwords aren't default what the manufacturer set for you. Question 6. Which of the following would most likely result from a zero-day vulnerability? Open service ports, cross-site scripting, shadow IT, or side loading? And the correct answer is cross-site scripting or XSS because this involves exploiting a vulnerability in a web page and injecting malicious JavaScript code in order to accomplish this. And cross-site scripting is very commonly associated with zero-day vulnerabilities because a zero-day vulnerability can be something like cross-site scripting or SQL injection or privilege escalation or buffer overflows, for example. Open service ports, none of the other answers are a result of a zero-day vulnerability. They're just statements in general. So open service ports describes ports which are just live services that are running on a system. So things like FTP on port 21, SMB on port 445, remember that one, or SSH on port 22, things like that. They can be potentially vulnerabilities if you're using things, yeah, like FTP or Telnet on port 23, then yeah, that can be a vulnerability, but we're looking for a zero-day vulnerability. That's not a zero-day vulnerability. Those vulnerabilities already exist for a long time. It's not newly discovered. Shadow IT, the concept of users in the organization using software or hardware for a purpose that was not intended by the organization. And sideloading, the concept of installing third-party applications that are not native to the official App Store. And while this could result in vulnerabilities or in malware, we're specifically talking for a zero-day vulnerability, which is a vulnerability that's not been discovered up until this very moment. So that doesn't make any sense. Question 7. An organization's systems have been affected by a malware outbreak. Which of the following should they perform first? Segmentation, isolation, patching, or encryption? And the correct answer is isolation because this is one of the malware eradication steps, and this involves first isolating the malware in the network. Because if you have a malware outbreak, you don't have time to patch your devices or to segment your stuff because the priority immediately is to stop the infection from going to all the other devices in the organization. That's why you'd isolate your systems so that that malware can't spread to the other devices. Segmentation is something you do before you got infected in the first place to segment your devices. Patching is used when you need to patch your applications, but if you're infected with malware, the priority is going to be to isolate the system so that it doesn't spread to all the other systems, creating that much more work for the users and the employees in the organization to remediate. Finally, encryption is the process of taking clear text and turning that into ciphertext that you'd encrypt using using the public key, and you decrypt using the private key. Question 8. Which of the following threat actors is most associated with personal opinions or beliefs? Nation state, hacktivist, insider threat, or organized crime? And the correct answer is a hacktivist because this is a threat actor that is politically or philosophically motivated by their own political or philosophical beliefs or opinions. Nation state, very sophisticated threat actor, very tech savvy, used to attack other countries, and their motivation is cyber espionage and war. Insider threat, insider in an organization with malicious intentions. Their motivation is typically blackmail or revenge. And organized crime, motivated by financial gain, profit, ransomware, anything involving money, and these are very sophisticated threat actors as well. Question 9. Which of the following vulnerabilities involves analyzing files on a public web server? SQL injection, directory traversal, phishing, or privilege escalation? And the correct answer is directory traversal because this is a vulnerability that allows you to see files on a web server that you shouldn't have access or authorization to view or see. So you typically accomplish a directory traversal vulnerability using the // parameter. So you type in the URL bar when you see the website like example.com, you can do example.com slash slash etsy slash passwd to attempt to view the Etsy password file, for example. SQL injection is the concept of exploiting a database vulnerability that will allow you to exfiltrate, view, or modify current database information. Phishing, the concept of extracting user information through making the user divulge their own personal information. And finally, privilege escalation is the concept of upgrading your current privileges to that of a higher level user, such as the administrator on Windows or the root account on Linux. Question 10. Which of the following attacks would best avoid account lockout? Spraying, privilege escalation, cross-site scripting, or brute force? And the correct answer is a password spraying attack because this involves trying either one password or just like 3 or 4 passwords, very common passwords, against a user account or a set of user accounts. And if you can't log in, you don't try endless passwords against an account. If you can't log in with those 3 or 4 passwords, you simply move on to the next account and attempt to log in from there. And that would best avoid an account lockout because the system will probably think that you're an authorized user who just forgot their password, for example. Whereas in a brute force attack, who's trying a million different passwords against a single user account, that's clearly not a legitimate user. That's someone trying to access the account who shouldn't have access to it. And that would easily trigger an account lockout, making it so that you can't continue to attempt brute force attacks. Cross-site scripting, the concept of injecting malicious JavaScript code into a website or web form. And finally, privilege escalation, the concept of exploiting a vulnerability, a very severe vulnerability like a kernel level vulnerability that would allow you to gain access to higher level privileges, such as the root account on Linux. So those were the 10 questions of the exam objectives of Domain 2. And if you're genuinely serious about passing your Security Plus exam on your first attempt, just as I did, then click the first link in the description and join my Telegram group because there I post daily practice questions just like these. I post tips and tricks on exactly what to study specifically for the exam, which objectives in particular should you study, which ones are repeated more, tips and tricks on how to study for the performance-based questions, and what I wish I had done when I took my exam the first time. So click the link, join the group, and I'll see you there.